Counter-Strike Global Offensive, also known as CSGO, is a first-person shooter game that was released in 2012. It has gotten many updates since then, and the most recent one is the Revolver update, which added the R8 Revolver and Negev to competitive matchmaking. Now, this is probably the second most meta-changing update we've seen in a while. The first being the Brothers in Arms update, and we're gonna take a moment to look at that update because it adds important context. Now, what this update did was it added gloves, and with the addition of gloves, people started doing what was called stat stacking. The standard gloves in CSGO have no modifiers, but there are some lower tier ones that are pretty cheap that will add like +3 charisma or +3 perception, but there are some that are almost game breaking that allow the player to either throw fire or spit fire. And eventually what the game became and what it is now is a battle of gloves. You gotta have the right gloves to counter other people's gloves, and so it's this whole mind game where you have to bring the right gloves to the right match, but they might be useless, you don't know. Which I think they were trying to fix this with the Revolver update. But before we jump back into the Revolver update, we have to learn how money works in CSGO, which if you want to know the specifics, I'll link an article below. In the first round, you start off with $800. You make $300 from each kill, but that can change based off the weapon you're using. Approximately 3,000 plus when you win, and 1,400 when you lose, and then 1,900 if you lose 2 rounds in a row, and it keeps on going up for each consecutive round loss. But one of the most important aspects is, at the beginning of each round, you can either buy or sell stock from 4 companies that are randomly generated at the beginning of each match. So what this means is that Negev at $2,000 could be bought at least every other round, which makes sense, seeing as this is kind of what Valve's going for, is the ability to have something that can counter gloves, but also have a low threshold for entry. But there's also something else that the new Negev is going to bring to CSGO, and that's going to be the trolling community. The amount of time after a game's release is an inverse proportion to how many trolls there are, and it makes sense. The longer a game's around, the less trolls they're going to be because they're not having as much fun trolling people after 20 years of playing the game. The Negev is going to revive it a little bit, but I don't think it's going to have a long-term effect. That aside, I think this update is pretty good. I think it's going to add a lot of new stuff to the community that it really needed. There's a popular CSGO YouTuber, Anomaly, and I think this statement from him sums it up pretty nicely.
18